Welcome to this overview of the fifth canto. We will go through the first 4 chapters and we'll make a quick resume and check what are the more relevant points which I found at least as relevant as such. So we start with the King Priyavrat, Maharaj Priyavrat, the activities of Maharaj Priyavrat, and so he was practically a renounced person. He was I would say, if we compare it with our actual standard in ISKCON, he was a sannyasi, in which under the instruction of Narada Muni has decided not to get involved into material life. But then happened that his father, Manu, wanted him to manage the government, the kingdom. So with the help of Brahma, he went to instruct him to take over his charge. Of course, initially he was quite reluctant. In fact, Narada Muni was just in that moment instructing him on his renounced life. But then at the end he followed the instruction of authorities such as Brahma and his father, and he accepted his karma, his role in society. So he got detached, he got into family life, and then he followed his duties as king. This situation is quite interesting because even Parikshit Maharaj was quite surprised of this behavior, of this supposedly elevated personality. If we could translate or shift this situation in actual time in our ISKCON society, it would be like if at a certain point a sannyasi, which was following nicely all the rules and regulations, he was fully fit in his position, he would drop his position of sannyasi and just take family life, for example. So that was quite surprising, Parikshit. But then now we understand that practically Priyavrat followed the instruction of his authorities, and he had a role, he had the karma to carry on in that incarnation, and so he took nicely over his duties as king, and he followed them nicely. It is said that in some way he got apparently attached to those duties, but that's normal. If you want to carry out dutifully and in a correct way your duty, you need some small little attachment. But the very interesting point is that as soon as he completed his duty, he had his progeny, then he handed over the kingdom nicely, without no problem, and he went back to his renounced life to attain the goal of life. So what is the position of King Priyavrat? King Priyavrat, of course, from my understanding, he was a pure devotee. I would say practically he was an Uttamadhikari. He was a realized soul, without no problem. And then it's interesting, his type of renunciation. His type of renunciation was fully in line with the teaching of Rupa Goswami that we see, for example, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So that's a point which is nicely explained by Srila Prabhupada in, I think, in purport 24. So King Priyavrat excellently applied the real renunciation which Rupa Goswami talk about, which is Yukta Vairagya. So when you reach the position of pure devotion, you can apply perfectly this principle of Yukta Vairagya. You can renounce, but accepting everything which is favorable and indicated for spiritual life to satisfy the Lord. One of the aspects that he satisfied the Lord is because he followed the authorities. He followed Brahma, he followed his father Manu. even if initially reluctantly, but then he followed perfectly the instructions which were given to him. So that's one point which I really liked much. So in the second chapter we talk about the activities of Maharaj Agnidra. Priyavrat had 2 wives and various children, and the major one was Agnidra. Agnidra took over the position of Priyavrat as king of the world, and he dutifully, very nicely, accomplished his duty. He was very kind. He was really following the Dharma, and then really protecting all living beings within his kingdom. So that was excellent, being a Kshatriya, of course. The point is that at a certain point, Maharaj Agnidra wanted a son, as any king wants to, in way to continue his dynasty. But then, instead of going and ask this child, praying the Lord, the Supreme Lord, to have this child, he went into a cave and then just worshipped and prayed the demigods. So already we see a certain level of devotion, which I would say, I'm sure being the son of Priyavrat, I'm sure he had knowledge of the existence of the Supreme, but then he decided to do the quick way, the fast way to obtain what he desired. So we can see that for sure Maharaj Agnidra was not a pure devotee. We could classify him as a mixed devotee. So he went on, he worshipped, and then as we know, as Bhagavad Gita says, the demigods are quite favorable to those who worship them, and then they will immediately try to satisfy their desire. So what Brahma did, in this case, he sent this celestial girl, Purvachiti, and then there is nice stories, explaining how they interacted, this male and female interaction, which is quite interesting in its expression. And then at the end of it, the 2 characters matched, and then they got married, and then Agnidra obtained his desire and got children from this celestial girl. So they lived nicely, that's no problem, but at a certain point this Purvachiti went back to the celestial world. So Agnidra was very sad, and then his only desire was to join back his wife. I'm always surprised and astonished about this story and why it is in the Bhagavatam. The only reason I came out which substantiate the fact that this story is in the Bhagavatam is, I'm sure, is for a comparison, to show, of course, to give some points of reflection to whoever reads and go through the Bhagavatam, because of course many lessons can be learned from this story. But I'm always astonished for the fact that at the end of it, Agnidra, in the next life, he will not achieve the supreme goal of each living entities, which is go back to Godhead. What happens to him? He goes to the heavenly planet. So that's something which always makes me a little bit doubtful, because if you think about the story of Nimi, King Nimi, that it's different. It's a different setting. Same, more or less, same type of story, but at the end of it, King Nimi will achieve. And we'll see in the Bhagavatam far ahead, he will achieve liberation and the pure goal of life, going back to Godhead. So, that's what I'm saying, that Agnidra always make me perplexed in this story. But anyway, let's see what are the main points which I got from this section, which I find quite interesting. And of course, what it is, one of the lessons of this section is to understand how important is spiritual understanding between husband and wife. That's so crucial for a successful family life. Of course, Prabhupada goes deeper, and then he puts on a spiritual level. And then it says that, of course, even for spiritual targets, it's so important that the man and the woman, the wife and the husband, are set on a nice level, which they can help each other to go forward in spiritual life. So that's something very interesting. And of course, we see in the stories how the energy and powers of each incarnation, female and male incarnation, which powers and energy they do manifest, they can manifest in this world, and how we should be really careful in handling them. Either if you're a man or a woman, you should really be careful to behave following the instruction of the Shastras first, but I would say also common sense, using intelligence when you behave in a social context, either that you are a man or a woman. So it's so important that both of them behave attentively. So okay, now we start off talking about chapter 3, entitled Rishabhadeva's appearance in the womb of Merudevi. This chapter talks about another type of devotee, which is King Nabi. So his life is described. For sure he had an excellent, spotless character. Can we say, so we saw initially in chapter 1 Priyavrat, Uttamadhikari, devotee, very elevated. Then we saw a really low-class mixed devotee as Agnideva. And now we go a little bit back up because we see King Nabi, excellent character, which was dutifully following the Dharma, running the empire after Agnidra, was a son of Agnidra, the eldest one. So Maharaj Nabi underwent many austerities, penances, and at the end of it he organized a big sacrifice because he wanted a son. But the peculiar things, or what differentiated him from his father, is that in this case King Nabi, wanting this child, instead of asking to the devas, the demigods, immediately went directly to the Supreme Lord. So he organized a sacrifice for the Lord, to satisfy the Lord, in way to receive a child, a son. So what type of devotee is this? For sure, we can say still a mixed devotees, but a quite elevated mixed devotees, which understand the existence of the Lord, very attached to the Lord, dutiful in his duties, and then he was very attached to devotees. In fact, those who ran the sacrifice, who performed the sacrifice, were all nice brahmanas, elevated personalities. They were really elevated personalities. They were Vaishnava, really, honestly. But then they were so pleased with the attitude of King Nabi in his way to perform his life, to run his life, that they decided to satisfy through this sacrifice his desire, his, let's say, material desire. So the sacrifice went on, and Lord Vishnu, being so satisfied by this sacrifice, by the nice intention also of the king, he manifested. He manifested. And we see from the story that apparently the Brahmanas were quite ashamed of having organized a sacrifice to satisfy the Lord, call him down on earth, just to get a son. But anyway, the Lord, being so merciful, wanting to please his devotees, the Brahmana and King Nabi also, in a certain extent, he granted this request. And he granted a son. But then, of course, the request of King Nabi was that he wanted a son like God, but that's not possible. You can have, as we know from our philosophy, there is no way to have another entity which is at the same level, equal to the Lord. That's not possible. So, anyway, Lord Vishnu promised to fulfill, so he said, okay, I will manifest as your child. One of my manifestations will be your child. And so that's where we'll see next chapter when Rishabhadeva will manifest. So the interesting thing we can saw in this chapter was the behavior of the Brahmanas, which I found were really Vaishnava, pure devotees. The interesting thing is that okay, they helped Nabi to obtain the son. But so how can we understand the behavior? And then recently I was reading Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Devotion, I would say better, and then we analyzed the importance of elevated personality, elevated souls, and one of the duty, one of their tasks, one of the services is to help sincere, lower maybe, living entities, human beings, which they want progress in the spiritual life. They will help them and then help them to raise their conscience. So that's what these Brahmana did. They helped King Nabi to raise his conscience. So that's one of the points which I really liked in this situation. But they were so humble that they felt ashamed. But they were in Krishna's plan fully. They were in Krishna's plan, so that's good. That's nice. That's fine. So we get to chapter 4, discussing the characteristics of Rishabhadeva. So a new personality is manifesting. Rishabhadeva, as we saw, is the son of Maharaj Nabi. It's just more than a son, as we discussed, is a manifestation, a plenary manifestation of Vishnu, Krishna. It's called Satyaveshavatara in some text. Chaitanya Charitamrita is called Satyaveshavatara, but then we understand it's a type of Satyaveshavatara, which is it's a divine manifestation. Is a direct plenary portion of Krishna. So Rishabhadeva, what can we say about him? He followed nicely all the rules and regulation of society. He showed how, since his birth, since his childhood and youth, he showed how someone should nicely and properly behave. He should follow the instruction of the authorities, follows families, when going to school, etc. And when King Nabi got to a certain age, which was time for him to retire, he passed on the government to Rishabhadeva. It's interesting to notice that what is the relationship between Nabi and Rishabhadeva? Of course, during the sacrifice we discussed in the previous chapter, we understand that King Nabi had heard that Vishnu, Krishna, would manifest as his son. So we may wonder, how can it be then King Nabi was behaving anyway in such affectionate way? We understand that Yoga Maya was working. Yoga Maya was acting as we see in Goloka Vrindavana, when is hiding the aspect of majesty of Krishna to Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda. So in the same case here, King Nabi, he just thought he was his son. Of course, he had like been Maya covering, he had this affection, this strong affection, which living entities can only have for God, for Krishna. Anyway, but that was functional for him to stay in the society, to live in the society, and to bring his instructions, which will come in contact with in the next chapters. Rishabhadeva, of course, being manifestation of God, was excellent in everything. The same name, Rishabha, means the best. The best. What can you say? Yeah, the best. And we'll see that during his ruling, everything was going very nicely. All the citizens loved him, loved his attitude, his behavior, his way to solve things, etc. And even if the demigods were not doing his job in supplying goods and rains and everything for the human race, then who cares? Rishabhadeva was there. The best would take over and do the business. And as we understand, it seems like no one, even Indra usually is quite resentful on those things, didn't say anything. He accepted because, well, that's okay. What can you do? If God wants to do it, then he can do it, no problem. So he got married. Rishabhadeva got married. A little point which I want to do about King Nabi. When he retired, when Rishabhadeva took over and then he retired, this is the transformation which was helped not only by the Brahmana, but living in contact with the Supreme Lord. And then he retired to Badarikashram, and then he fulfilled the aim of life, just to worship the Lord and reconnect with Him and going back to the Godhead. So that's another nice point in comparison to Agnidra, which remained in the limbo in the celestial worlds. Anyway, who knows? So anyway, going ahead, we can see that so Rishabhadeva was perfect in his behavior, got married to Jayanti, and then he had also quite few children, which the main one was King Bharata, Maharaj Bharata. And then we'll look at this personality again in the future. So Rishabhadeva had many sons, and many sons with many different qualifications. So as we see for Priyavrat, which also had many different type of sons and daughters, we can see that any of them had like a personality and a certain qualification in life. And so based on that qualification, based on that character, each of them accepted a way of living. Some of them became, let's say, sannyasi, or accepted the Brahminical way. Some of them were really kshatriya, so they did take over, as Bharata, for example, they did take over the ruling of the government, of the kingdom. So like this, So that's another interesting point, because that proves that the pertaining to the ashram or the varnas in Vedic society was really based on qualification, not, for example, birth or other type of, or other rights, no, mainly birth really, family birth. Okay, so that's one interesting point of this section. Another point which is, I find relevant is what is the motivation for Rishabhadeva to manifest? And then we can understand that Rishabhadeva wanted to teach any people how to get in the right way education, which should be taken from the right source, which is the Vedic teachers or Vedic scripture, etc. Okay, so those are the quite few points which I find quite relevant in this section. We'll see in future other teaching of Rishabhadeva about other instruction anyway. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.